In May 1944, a creepy silence descended across the Japanese Imperial Navy's communications network. One by one, Admiral Soemu Toyoda's carefully positioned submarines, his eyes and ears in the Pacific, fell quiet. First row 106, then row 104 and 116. 5 submarines had vanished in less than a week, leaving row 105 as one of Toyoda's last hopes for his plan of trapping the American fleet. As reports of the missing submarines reached Tokyo, Imperial headquarters dispatched urgent warnings to their remaining vessels. Something was happening that had never occurred before in naval history. A strange new weapon was on the loose, and a mysterious American ship was somehow doing this all on its own. John C. England. After months of training at various ports across the mainland, Ensign John C. England had just recently arrived in Hawaii, ready to serve the United States Navy. Just before dawn, he reported for duty in the radio room of USS Oklahoma, moored at Battleship Row in Pearl Harbor. The date was December 7th, 1941. Unlike England, USS Oklahoma was a seasoned veteran of the fleet. Commissioned during the First World War, she had once shielded Allied convoys in the Atlantic and later rescued American citizens and refugees during the Spanish Civil War. However, none of that mattered now. As the sun climbed over Oahu, distant shapes emerged in the sky. The droning of engines grew louder, turning more menacing by the second. Then, without warning, hundreds of Japanese aircraft descended into the harbor. At around 7:50 a.m., the Oklahoma was rocked by the first of many torpedo strikes. In the radio room, Ensign England grasped for balance as the bulkheads trembled around him. Torpedo after torpedo slammed into the battleship, 3 in the first minutes alone. The hull twisted as the ship began to list sharply, turning onto her side at an alarming speed. The order came to abandon ship. England, like the rest of the crew, should have fled. Instead, he made a split-second choice that would define his service. Disobeying orders, he plunged deeper into the ship's flooding corridors. Trapped shipmates needed help, and England refused to leave them behind. He made one trip, and another, and another. 3 times he dragged dazed and injured sailors toward safety. But on his 4th run, as Oklahoma began to roll over, he could not keep going. Outside, enemy aircraft strafed the water with gunfire, tearing through lifeboats and sailors who had barely escaped the ship. Oklahoma, hit by as many as 8 torpedoes, capsized within 12 minutes, with only her starboard keel remaining above water. 429 sailors were lost that morning aboard Oklahoma, including Ensign John C. England. The very next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed the nation. Despite the country's efforts to stay out of World War II, this had become a battle that the United States could no longer ignore. This was personal. Japan against the tide. By 1944, Japan's Navy, battered and worn, faced an enemy that not only matched its might, but now surpassed it, producing aircraft carriers, planes, and a new generation of expertly trained pilots at a pace they couldn't match. Yet Japan wasn't ready to concede defeat, and in one last bid to regain control of the Pacific, Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, devised Operation Eigo, a plan to bait the U.S. Navy into a final battle near the Mariana Islands, where Japan would deploy the full force of its first mobile fleet, supported by hundreds of land-based aircraft and long-range carrier planes, with the goal of annihilating the American fleet before it could even strike back. But there was a problem. Japan's reconnaissance capabilities had decayed. Allied air superiority ruled the skies, and advanced American encryption systems had rendered Japanese radio interceptions nearly useless. Being in desperate need of intelligence, Toyoda turned to one of the last tools left at his disposal: submarines. The task fell to 7 Co-type submarines. Their mission was to spread out across a 200-mile stretch of sea between New Guinea and the Carolines. This formation, codenamed the NA Line, would serve as a spy post for Japan. Should they detect any American task force, Toyoda would spring the trap and unleash his fleet in what he hoped would be a war-turning ambush. What Admiral Toyoda didn't realize was that as he set his plan in motion, the Americans were already one step ahead. At Pearl Harbor, the crypto-analysts of Fleet Radio Unit Pacific had intercepted critical Japanese communications that revealed the deployment of enemy submarines across the region. The United States wasted no time. From Purvis Bay, Escort Division 39 was dispatched, a hunter-killer group formed by 3 Buckley-class destroyer escorts, USS George, USS Raby, and USS England, a vessel named after the young sailor who lost his life aboard USS Oklahoma at Pearl Harbor. The ultimate subkiller. The Buckley class was a family of over 100 battleships rapidly deployed by the United States between 1943 and 44 to meet the demands of war in the Pacific. Though originally designed for convoy protection, these ships quickly earned a reputation for their ruthless efficiency in submarine hunting. Longer, faster, and tougher than their Everett-class predecessors, the Buckley-class destroyers were equipped with advanced sonar and radar systems, while also featuring an ample array of weapons, including triple-mounted 3-inch guns and multiple anti-aircraft batteries, manned by crews trained for high-precision attacks. But lurking on the deck of the Buckley-class destroyers was one weapon that sent chills down the spines of Japanese submarines more than any other: the Hedgehog. Developed by the British Royal Navy, the Hedgehog was a forward-firing spigot motor that could hurl 24 explosive projectiles in a tight, circular pattern ahead of the ship. Unlike traditional depth charges, which exploded at preset depths and often missed their mark, Hedgehogs were contact-fused and detonated only upon contact. Before the introduction of the Hedgehog, warships often struggled with a critical blind spot when attacking submarines. As they closed in for a depth charge attack, ships had to pass directly over the target, causing them to lose sonar contact in the critical moments just before launching. The Hedgehog solved this problem by giving crews the ability to fire forward from the bow, allowing destroyers to maintain sonar lock on the submarine right up to the moment of impact, giving enemy subs virtually no time to maneuver or escape. Once a Hedgehog motor hit, there was no chance of retaliation. Packed with 35 pounds of Torpex, an explosive compound 50% stronger than TNT, one direct hit could rip through steel hulls and send a submarine plunging to the ocean floor in seconds. For Axis submariners, this was an absolute menace. The hunt begins. The first submarine targeted by USS George's Hunter Group wasn't part of the Roe-class group tasked with forming the NA line, but rather the I-16, a larger Type C-1 submarine that was no stranger to war. Years prior, she'd taken part in the attack on Pearl Harbor, launching one of the midget submarines tasked with slipping into the base ahead of the air assault. Now, she'd been reassigned to run supply missions to stranded Japanese troops in Boyne, Papua New Guinea. Before she could complete her mission, the Allies were already closing in. Spotted north of Bougainville by an Allied patrol aircraft, the submarine's position was swiftly relayed to Escort Division 39. The destroyers mobilized at once, forming a sweeping line 4,000 yards apart from their target, moving in parallel while tracking the movement of the submarine. USS England was the first to make sonar contact on May 19th, yet the Japanese wouldn't make it easy on her. Below the surface, the enemy sub began fishtailing, swinging its stern side to side in sharp turns, scrambling sonar pings, and evading precision strikes. But England wasn't about to let a Pearl Harbor veteran slip away, surging forward at high speed and keeping tight on the enemy's tail. Each time England got close enough to strike, I-16 twisted away with another sudden turn, vanishing from sonar screens and forcing the Americans to recalibrate. Commander Walton B. Pendleton gave the order to open fire, and a cluster of spigot mortars launched from the bow, but they all missed. Undeterred, England launched 2 more salvos. One struck home. Still, the I-16 pressed on, its crew refusing to go down without a fight. Another Hedgehog attack, another miss. The Japanese submarine was dangerously close to escaping. Just past 2:30 p.m., England's sonar locked on again. Commander Pendleton turned to his crew and shouted, quote, "Fire Hedgehogs." The mortars launched, arcing ahead toward the enemy. Moments later, an explosion rocked the ocean, lifting England's fantail from the water and slamming sailors to the deck. For a few moments, the Americans believed they had been the ones torpedoed. But then, oil began to come up to the surface, followed by debris. Pieces of broken furniture, twisted metal, and the last remains of the supplies that never made their way to the Japanese troops in Boyne. I-16 was gone, and England had secured her first victory, making it clear that no submarine in the area would be safe as long as she was around. Night attack. As Escort Division 39 hunted I-16, another battle was taking place nearby. Overhead, U.S. Navy bombers had spotted and obliterated Row 117. However, Admiral William F. Halsey, commander of the U.S. Third Fleet, wasn't convinced 117 was prowling the waters alone, and upon confirming through intercepted messages that Admiral Toyoda was casting a wider net of submarines across the region, he ordered the destroyer group to sweep the surrounding waters where Row 117 had gone down. The Row 100 class, officially known as Co-type coastal submarines, were smaller than Japan's fleet subs, but no less dangerous. Designed for ambush and point defense, they were quick, nimble, and built for stealth. With top surface speeds of 14.2 knots and 8 knots submerged, they could dart in and strike with their 21-inch torpedo tubes, rapidly getting lost in the depths before their victims had a chance to strike back. As USS England, USS George, and USS Raby pushed through the waters west of Manus Island, they were at risk of falling victim to the Co-type's vicious hit-and-run attacks. Visibility was near zero after sunset. The sea turned pitch black, and radar became their only hope at spotting enemies hiding in the shadows. Still, Pendleton's men sailed on. The search for the enemy was tense, but in the pre-dawn hours of May 22nd, a crackle of excitement tore through the bridge of USS George. At exactly 3:50 a.m., radar picked up a faint surface contact, an enemy submarine cruising just within range. England was ordered to hold position, forming a containment arc while George and Raby surged forward to intercept. As they approached the blip's last known coordinates, George cut through the darkness with her searchlight, slicing across the Black Sea, and there it was. Row 106, one of Toyoda's NA line sentinels, caught the spotlight just as she began her dive. George fired the first salvo of hedgehogs, but the charges plunged into the deep without a sound, and the submarine vanished. 10 minutes later, England's sonar pinged back as she re-established contact with the submarine. Commander Pendleton didn't hesitate, commanding a volley of hedgehogs to be launched into the sea. Once again, there were no detonations. Despite having a chance to run away, Row 106 turned back, perhaps trying to throw off her pursuers, perhaps getting ready to fire her own torpedoes at England. Whatever the reason, this move gave Pendleton the chance to line up another shot. Mortars soared off England's bow, and seconds later, 3 explosions went off, one right after the other. As England crept toward the impact zone, the crew could see a dark stain of oil spreading across the surface. The enemy was gone. To this day, the final moments of Row 106 remain a mystery. Some believe that while England's mortars may have severely damaged Row 106, it was the submarine's crew who made the ultimate decision to scuttle their vessel, rather than face capture by the Americans. In just 3 days, USS England had already sent 2 enemy submarines to the bottom of the ocean. 3 for 3. The day after Escort Division 39 neutralized Row 106, the hunters pressed on through Admiral Toyoda's NA line. However, as they progressed with their mission, it felt as though the ocean itself had turned against them. Under a cloak of gray clouds and low visibility, the early hours of May 23rd forced the destroyer escorts to once again rely solely on their radar operators and the vigilance of Allied patrols. One of these aircraft first spotted Row 104, surfacing roughly 250 nautical miles north of Cavieng, New Ireland. At 6:10 a.m., the radar aboard USS Raby lit up. Row 104 had been detected just 4 miles out. The trio of ships sprang and picked up their speed, engines roaring as they closed the gap. But the submarine, sensing the trap closing in, dove before her challengers could get a clean strike. Raby was first to attack, launching a spread of hedgehog mortars into the sea, but the projectiles hit nothing but water. As she circled for another pass, Row 104 countered with sonar jamming pulses, flooding the water with acoustic bursts meant to confuse the American soundmen and throw off their targeting. Once more, the responsibility fell to USS England, and once more, she did not disappoint. After an initial volley failed to connect, England's next attack hit the target. About a dozen contact-fused mortars slammed into Row 104's hull in rapid succession. An explosion rippled beneath the waves, followed by the sound of a submarine being torn apart in the deep. Wanting to finish the job, England released 13 depth charges, ensuring there would be no escape for 104. Hours later, the victory was confirmed as the jagged remnants of the Japanese submarine began to surface. The battle picks up. In the days that followed, the hunt led by Escort Division 39 only grew more intense. On the night of May 24th, the trio of destroyers raced toward a fresh sonar contact detected by USS George, the Japanese submarine lurking just 7 miles off, identified as Row 116, another member of Admiral Toyoda's dwindling NA line. The enemy submarine immediately began evasive maneuvers, but USS England was already moving in for the strike. As soon as sonar painted the contact's position, her crew let loose with a salvo of hedgehogs. 4 projectiles splashed into the dark water. There was no explosion. For hours, the destroyers combed the area, scouring every ripple for evidence that the enemy had been struck. Then, as dawn crept across the sea, they began to spot it. An oil slick, slowly spreading, and fragments of decking spread for miles. Row 116, it turned out, had taken a hit, yet remained able to limp out from the battle scene until eventually succumbing to her wounds. It wouldn't be until a month later that the Imperial Japanese Navy confirmed that the submarine, along with all hands, had been lost. The crew on board USS England had just secured their 4th victory. However, their vessel was now running low on fuel and dangerously short on hedgehogs, and if they wanted to remain afloat amid the submarine-infested waters, they would need to set course for Manus Island to resupply. Before they could reach their destination, at just 100 nautical miles from Seidler Harbor, radar operators aboard Raby in England picked up another contact, Row 108. Despite low energy, limited ammo, and battle-weary crews, Commander Pendleton ordered the division to return to the sea. It was a risk. They all knew it, but letting the enemy slip away was out of the question. Raby led the charge, her crew loading one of their final hedgehog salvos as they raced across the waves. She fired a perfect arc of mortars into the sea, but Row 108 evaded the blast at the last moment. Commander Pendleton, cool under pressure, gave the order to strike. Hedgehogs flying off England's deck once again. The mortars found their way to the enemy, unleashing a series of violent underwater detonations that echoed throughout the region. The next morning, the battered but triumphant destroyers limped into Manus Island. There, they refueled, rearmed, and took on fresh hedgehog rounds, preparing for the final phase of their mission. Toyoda's NA line was near total collapse, and Escort Division 39 was determined to finish the job. The 30-hour duel. Out at sea, Escort Division 39 was met with reinforcements in the form of a second hunter-killer group, led by the escort carrier USS Hagat Bay, flanked by the destroyers USS Hazelwood and USS McCord, as well as the destroyer escort USS Spangler. But as the group regained strength, the Japanese had begun taking precautions. Warnings were dispatched to every submarine in the area, instructing them to evade the American hunters at all costs. Most heeded the call, diving deep and slipping away into the vast Pacific, but Row 105 remained. Whether her crew never received the message or simply refused to abandon their post is unknown. By staying in the region, the submarine was gambling with the lives of her crew. In the early morning of May 30th, USS Hazelwood made contact with 105. Without hesitation, she dropped a pattern of depth charges in an attempt to destroy the target before it could dive. The attack failed. Row 105 fought with all she had, dumping oil and debris into the water, faking her own destruction, fishtailing on and off, and slipping just beyond sonar with every pass. USS George and USS Raby hounded her for hours, launching barrage after barrage of hedgehogs and depth charges. 16 attacks in total, all resulting in 0 hits. At one point, Row 105 surfaced, but did so with perfect timing and positioning, rising directly between George and Raby. The American ships were locked, unable to fire without risking each other. Time was slipping away, and as the sun began to rise, word came through that Japanese aircraft were en route. If the Americans stayed longer in the area, they ran the risk of being targeted themselves. Orders were given to retreat. The chase had turned too risky for destroyers to carry on. Still, Commander Walton Pendleton protested. He still hadn't gotten his chance to take a shot at the enemy. He radioed Commander Hamilton Haynes aboard USS George, requesting one chance to strike before retreating. Nearly 30 hours after the destroyers had initially made contact with Row 105, England surged forward into her firing run. Below the waves, Row 105 attempted to dodge the incoming vessel, but it was useless. Hedgehogs flew off her deck, and moments later, the sea erupted. 2 charges detonated, the shockwaves rocking England's deck and sending sailors staggering. By the time the waters settled, every single member of the escort division was in disbelief. England had just done the impossible: sink 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days. Commander Haynes took to the radio and messaged Pendleton, quote, "God damn it, how do you do it?" Fallout. By now, Escort Division 39 had shattered the backbone of Admiral Toyoda's NA line, sinking 5 of the 7 submarines originally deployed to form Japan's early warning net. For 2 more weeks, the division scoured the Pacific in search of the remaining stragglers, unaware that the line was already broken. Row 109 and Row 112, the last survivors, had fled upon receiving warnings from officials who finally recognized the futility of resisting the Americans in those waters. With the submarine screen annihilated, the Imperial Japanese Navy was left blind, unable to track U.S. fleet movements or prepare a coordinated response. Lacking accurate intelligence, Japan began misallocating forces, wasting fuel, and leaving vital island bases and ports dangerously underdefended. The grand promise of Operation Ego, Japan's plan to launch a decisive blow against the advancing U.S. Navy, had collapsed. In June 1944 came the big finale, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Lured into combat without the benefit of surveillance, Japan's rebuilt carrier force made a fatal miscalculation. Expecting to catch the Americans off guard, they instead walked into a wall of radar-guided defenses and squadrons of experienced U.S. pilots flying the new Grumman F-6F Hellcats. In a matter of hours, over 350 Japanese aircraft were shot out of the sky, many before they even reached the American fleet. The Japanese naval air power that once terrorized the Pacific and claimed the lives of so many American sailors during Pearl Harbor was decimated. Aboard the ship that bore his name, Ensign John C. England was finally avenged. A bittersweet ending. USS England went on to receive the Presidential Unit Citation and 10 battle stars for her service, while her commander, Lieutenant Commander Walton B. Pendleton, was awarded the Navy Cross for achieving the destruction of the 6 enemy submarines. However, soon after the submarine hunting campaign, Pendleton was reassigned to lead a different escort division in Alaska for the remainder of the war, leaving England under the command of Officer John Williamson. For the rest of 1944, the ship shifted roles, setting aside her undersea hunts and instead serving as a convoy escort, helping establish the chain of forward bases that would pave the way for America's final push to conquer the last bastions of the Japanese Empire across the Pacific. England would not see much action again until May 9, 1945, when, stationed off the coast of Okinawa, 3 Japanese aircraft emerged from the skies, diving straight for the ship on a kamikaze mission. Williamson's crew sprang into action. Gun crews rushed to their positions, tracer fire rising up to the sky and hitting one attacker, which immediately burst into flames. American combat air patrols intercepted the other 2, blasting them into the sea. But the flaming aircraft, still airborne, had one final act of vengeance. The pilot, clinging to the controls, steered his burning plane into England's starboard side, hitting just below the bridge and detonating a bomb on impact. The blast cost the lives of 37 men and injured another 25 more. The crew fought the roaring flames, eventually saving their ship. The damage, however, was severe, and after temporary repairs, England was forced to limp back to the U.S., where she was slated for restoration. But the war ended before repairs could begin. With victory declared and budgets tightening, the decision was made. USS England would not sail again. She was decommissioned on October 15, 1945, just 2 years after she first took to the sea. In 1963, a new USS England, a modern Leahy-class guided missile cruiser, was commissioned in her honor. She would go on to serve in Vietnam and later in Operation Desert Storm. Still, USS England's original campaign in May 1944 was never matched, and as historian W.H. Holmes states, her impressive quest against Japan remains, quote, the most brilliant anti-submarine operation in history.